Okay, welcome to today's class where we're making this teeny tiny little pouch. Great for a beginner. It's perfect for keeping your mobile phone charger in and the cable. And I also managed to get my headphones in there too. So gather your things together and let's get started. So you'll need to cut 4 pieces all the same size, 2 for the outer, 2 for the lining, and you'll also need to interface the outer fabric. I've used an iron-on wadding, a thin iron-on wadding, HXWxD or HXWxD or equivalent of is fine. I've not bothered interfacing the lining as this is such a small pouch. You could interface that with a lightweight interfacing if you wanted to. So these all measure 6.5 inches wide by 4.5 inches tall. And then you need 1 piece for your tab, which is 1.5 tall by 2.5 wide. You could replace this with just a little bit of ribbon. And then you need a 6-inch zip, or the equivalent of zip on a roll. This is a size 3 dress zip. If you're using zip on a roll, you may, the size 6-inch is the length of the zip. It actually measures just over 7 inches, about 7.25 inches. Okay, but these 6-inch zips work well here because you don't have to fold the ends in because you've got this extra bit on either end. Okay, when you've done that, meet me back here. Okay, so you only need a few supplies to make this little pouch. I've used some clips and pins, scissors. I've used a friction iron-off marking pen. I've used a glue pen to help me with my zip. I've used a pair of tweezers that just helps me push things through the sewing machine. And this rolled up bit of paper is in place of a bulky seam aid or a hump jumper. Just something when you get to the thick parts where the zip is on the zip, helps level your foot out to get over it. If you've got a proper guide, that's great. If you've not, just roll up a bit of paper or a bit of card. Okay, so the first thing to do is to make our little zip tab. So if you turn it over right side down, fold it in half and crease it, and then fold the sides into the center crease on both long edges like that, and then fold it in, folded edge to folded edge, give that a press, and then we're just going to stitch down either side. I'm going to use a top stitch length of between 3.5 and 4mm stitch length, whichever you prefer. I like a 4mm, so I'm going to do that on this. Okay, there we go. So I've just stitched in, from the 2 edges. If you sew the open edge with the 2 folded edges first, hold it together and then sew the other edge. Once you've done that, decide which is your best side, and then I'm going to just either you could either sew, or I'm just using a glue pen, fabric glue pen, just to stick the ends together on that. So that's ready to use shortly. So I'm just going to set that aside, and next you want to take one of your fronts and your zip. I've just got a few clips to help me sew this in. You could use 1/4 inch quilting tape to help you hold your zip on. You could also use the glue pen if you have a glue pen to help you with this as well, or you could use both. So to use both, I'm just going to run a little bit of glue along the top edge, and then this is right side up. Turn your zip over so it's facing right side down. Then I'm just going to place it so it slightly overhangs at each end, about an even amount, so that'll help hold it in place. Okay, and then you can either stitch that now within the seam allowance, so just stitch a little line along there now, or you can just get your lining, put it right side down. You could add a bit more glue along this edge, and then stick that down, lined up with that top edge. Okay, we can always We can always push it into place if necessary at this end when the time comes. I'm just going to add a few clips now just to be on the safe side, and then we're just going to take that to the sewing machine and sew along the top edge at 1/4 of an inch. If you put your zipper foot on, the edge of your front edge of your zipper foot will press up against the zip, and then stitch that in. Okay, there you go. You can see that's stitched on. Now, if you're brand new and you've not sewn before, this is your zipper foot, and this, when it sits on, it's on your machine. The actual bit of the zipper, you can feel it through, will sit under this section at the side here, like that, and then this will be pushing right up against the teeth as you sew along, like that. Now, as you get to your zipper pull there, if you need to get past it, because you can't get past it, you leave your needle down and then pull your zipper past it, put your foot back down, and then carry on till you get to the end. Back stitch at both ends. So once you've done that, you can open it out, fold that back on both sides and give that a quick press, and then we're going to repeat on the other side. Okay, so that's been pressed, so it's pressed away from the zipper. We'll top stitch that in a minute. We're just going to repeat what we just did with the next side. Make sure your fabric is right side up. Okay, so if you put it to the side, make sure it's facing the right way around and flip it over, and then it's going to go to the top edge of the zipper. So again, we'll add a little bit of glue and then tape that on, and then stick that on. Okay, turn it over, and then you're going to add a bit of glue on this side. Put your lining right side down on top of that one, and line this up on the other side of the zip. Make sure everything here at the side lines up. Now, choice is yours which side you sew from. I'm going to sew from this side. Put my clips back on just to be on the safe side, and then again just take that to the machine and sew that on. Back stitch at each end, 1/4 of an inch. Okay, so we're going to open that out, open the other lining out. I'll just close the zip up for a minute, and then press those into place. Okay, so they're pressed into place, and we're going to top stitch about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. I'm using a 4mm top stitch length. You can use from either 3.5 or 4, whichever you choose. Okay, so there you go, that's my top stitching. I've done it in white so you can see the stitching. You could obviously do it in a matching colour. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're just going to attach our tab. So you want to fold your lining back away from this, and you have it on the side where your zipper is, and then we're just going to put it about half an inch down from the top edge. Now you can either glue that in, or you can just put a pin on it or a clip. Do it within your seam allowance. I'm doing 1/2 inch seam allowance on these. I know that sounds a lot, but that's what I do on most things. Now, at this point, so we're going to have a 1/2 inch there, so that'll leave you about that long of a tab. If you want a shorter tab, then overhang the edge a little bit, and we're going to have a 1/2 inch there, and then it won't be too long. Okay, so that only takes a minute to dry, and then also once that's dried, we're then just going to go to the machine and just add a couple of little stitches on there as well to make sure that it doesn't move. Okay, there you go, that's stitched on. Now, a little tip for stitching that on is start sewing in the middle. Put your foot so it's the needles in the middle, and then forward and backwards. if you start on one edge, you can push it further down and then it can end up tilted like that as it pushes. So if you start in the middle and go forward and then go backwards and go back over it, you don't need to backstitch, then that's held in place so that when we sew it together, that'll be fine. Okay, so now you just want to open your zip just a little bit more than halfway, and then you're going to bring your right sides together, and then you're going to bring your lining pieces right sides together as well. Okay, so I'm going to pin it at the joins here, and then I'm just going to use clips everywhere else. Now you also want to mark a turning gap in your seam allowance. I usually like to do about a hand's width, so just put a couple of marks either side of your hand or thereabouts for the turning gap when we sew that in a little while. This is just a heat erasable pen, so we're just going to clip this at the sides. I think we'll just trim our zip down. Don't use your dressmaking scissors for this. So we'll just trim that at each end. Now I don't like to trim this tab here because it helps it pivot and stay in place, I find, when it's turned right side out. So okay, so you push your zip, the zipper pushes towards the inside, towards the lining. Can you see? That pushes towards the lining. So make sure you line up your two outer pieces. So if you can see that in there, so these two pieces line up so they're straight, and then I like to stick a pin in that. Just move that out of the way so that that doesn't shift. I find if I do with this with clips, it can move. Sorry, put that back down. Do that again. Just line that up. Your lining's there. And a pin in there. And then a pin on the other side as well. Okay, turn it round. And then repeat on this side. Okay, and then you can go on then and just clip the rest. So we're going to start sewing here at this mark. So we're going to start here and backstitch a couple of times because that's where the stress on that. Sew to this corner, leaving the needle down and pivot and turn, and then sew all the way around until we meet this mark here, and then you're going to backstitch a couple of times there. Okay, so we're starting at the mark, so doing a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I start off with my needle down, and then I turn, put my foot back down, 1, 2, 3 stitches, 2, 3 stitches, leave your needle down, flip back and turn. Gives you a nice neat opening this. And then sew to 1/2 inch from the edge, or thereabouts. Leave the needle down and turn. Okay, when we get to this point, your foot starts to go up at an angle because it's bulky there. So what we want to do is, if you've got a bulky seam aid or a hump jumper, they call them, put that under the back of the foot. If you haven't got one, just roll up a piece of paper or card, and then you can put that under the back of your foot. And that helps level your foot out, and so you're less likely to get any skipped stitches. You might have to keep pushing it forward, and it keeps your foot level when you're going under. Now make sure if you've got a metal stopper on your zip, you don't hit it. If you're not sure, then hand crank it with the wheel. Okay, take the pins out. And then continue round. Now you'll find the same on, you might find the same on this side, I have got this here, so it is levelling it out, but as it starts to come down, you can put that under the front of your foot. Just don't stitch through it till your foot levels out. One more stitch. And then you stitch to your mark, stop at your mark, leave your needle down, turn, and then stitch down to your bottom. Cut your thread. Okay, so you've gone all the way around. Okay, so there we go. We've stitched all the way around. Okay, and then trim a little bit where the zip is in the seam, so that's not too bulky there. Do the same on that side. Makes it a little bit less bulky. I'll trim that down a bit. I'm not going to trim this off though. Just trim the seams. And then you can do the same on your lining. Now don't trim where your turning gap is. You can do either side of it, but don't trim where that is. That's easier to fold in when it's larger. Okay, so we're going to put some corners on now. Don't trim across your turning gap here because that's easier to turn in when it's a bit bigger, and I've trimmed everything else down a bit. I'll leave this out. I don't trim that because that helps it pivot somewhat. You could do it a little bit so it's not too long, but I like to leave that a bit longer because it helps it, like I say, pivot out properly. So now we're just going to do the little box corners. So get a ruler, and then from your stitch line just measure and draw a 1-inch box. Do that on all of them. I'm just realising here I've trimmed the corners off, and you don't really need to when you're boxing your corners. It can help though, make it sit a bit flatter when you're doing it. Okay. So once they're drawn on, now you can either just fold them like this, and your points will be in the corners, so that you can either pin or clip that. Ready for sewing. I'm just going to stick a pin in and do that on all 4 corners. Try and make your seam along the bottom go in the same direction. So the points in the corner of the box will go into the folds here, so you'll know it'll be lined up. Okay, so then we're going to take these to the machine, and we're just going to sew across this line, back stitch at the start and the end. I like to sew across it twice, just to make sure it's secure. Okay, once you've stitched across all your corners, just trim them off to about 1/4 of an inch. And then we're ready for turning this through. Okay, so push it all through. It should go through quite easily. So you turn through to the lining and then turn through to the outside. Okay, so that's turned through. So all you've got to do now is sew up your turning gap. So just push in the edges and it should come in together quite nicely. Now you can pin that or clip it, and then take that to your machine and then just sew across as close to the edge as you can. Just sew on your machine, remembering to backstitch at the start and the finish. You could hand sew it as well if you want to do. Okay, there you can see that's all stitched up. So then just push that back down inside, down into the corners, and then give it a good press. Okay, so there you go. There's your little pouch all finished. And as you can see, it's the perfect size for your mobile phone charger and cable. So I hope you enjoyed that. I'll see you next time. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you in the next one.